Chapter 10. Time heals. But some wounds age with you. Some wounds don't disappear. They just grow up with you, quieter, deeper, and more polite about how they hurt. Word count. Approximately 1,200 words. We've all heard it. Time heals everything. It's written in books, whispered in breakups, said like a promise, like a spell. But what if time doesn't heal? What if time just teaches you how to bleed more discreetly? What if the wounds don't close? They just stop screaming. They say the days will help, that the weeks will soften it, that the years will carry it away. But what they don't say is how some pain doesn't leave with the calendar. It just learns to wear better clothes. It becomes that quiet ache you carry into meetings, that sudden pause in the middle of a laugh, that silence right before you sleep. Time isn't always a healer. Sometimes it's just a painter. It colors your pain in new shades, gives it a new shape, a new name. But it doesn't erase it. You don't forget. You just learn how to remember without falling apart. Years can pass, and still, a street, a voice, a scent can pull you right back to the moment your heart broke. You'll feel your chest tighten like it did that day. You'll hear your breath catching your throat, just like it did when they walked away. And you'll realize the pain never left. It just got better at hiding. You grow around your wounds like trees do around fences and scars. You bloom with the damage still inside, not in spite of it, but because of it. But let's stop pretending that blooming means healing. Sometimes the flower still aches for the root it lost. They told you you'd be okay by now, and in many ways, you are. You've moved forward. You've built things. You've smiled, laughed, loved again. But sometimes you still hear your old pain knocking from behind closed doors. Softly, respectfully, as if to say, I haven't left. I've just grown quiet. And maybe that's what real grief is, not loud tears or shattered glasses, but the silent way your voice trembles when you speak of them, the way you pause before saying their name, the way your chest still forgets how to breathe when you see someone who looks like them in a crowd. Poetic, whisper. Some heartbreaks don't end. They just become part of your voice, your handwriting, your morning routine. Time teaches you how to carry it better. You learn how to smile with a heavy heart. You learn how to love again without comparing. You learn how to look happy without feeling guilty. But none of that means the wound has healed. It only means you've adjusted your steps around the ache. Sometimes we confuse coping with healing. Just because it doesn't destroy you anymore doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. You just built better walls, better distractions, better schedules. But at night, when everything is still, the ache still finds you. And then you remember, time didn't take it away. You just learned how to carry it without letting it ruin your day. You buried it under routines, under laughter, under new memories. But deep down, you still remember what it felt like to be left while still needing. You still remember how your voice cracked when you said, I'll be fine, and meant none of it. You remember how it felt when the world moved on and you didn't. And that's the thing. You can forgive. You can understand. You can even wish them well. But some hurts age with you. They grow wrinkles. They learn silence. But they never leave. Final reflection. What if healing isn't forgetting, but simply remembering without breaking every time? Chapter 11. The Strength in Falling Apart. Gracefully. There is a strange kind of courage in falling apart without making a sound. They always talk about strength like it's loud, like it's fists clenched, voices raised, walls built. But there's another kind of strength, quieter, slower, softer. The kind of strength that breaks beautifully, that collapses with dignity, that cries without apology. We don't talk about this kind of strength, the kind where you're falling apart and no one knows, where your world is crumbling, but your voice remains calm, where your heart is breaking, but you still ask someone if they've eaten today. Graceful pain is a quiet art. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't throw things. It doesn't scream, "Look at me." It just breathes softly, even when it's hard to. You can be the strongest person in the room and still be the one who's barely holding it together. You can be the shoulder for everyone else while your own trembles in silence. Some days, strength is not about holding it in, but about knowing when to let go without losing your grace. It's not weakness to collapse. It's honesty. It's real. Poetic line. To bleed without blame, to cry without collapse, that is a quiet kind of power. People expect pain to be obvious. Tears, screams, shattered glass. But some of us bleed in silence, behind smiles. In polite conversations, some of us hurt with elegance. Because we've had to. Because we were taught that screaming makes people leave, but silence makes them stay. We learned how to hide our trembling, how to laugh while sinking, how to dress our despair in perfect sentences, not because we wanted to, but because no one ever stayed for the mess. So we became neat versions of grief, polished sadness, well-dressed heartbreak. We didn't stop hurting. We just became better at hurting quietly. You might be the person who shows up for everyone, who always listens, who always says, "I'm fine." But maybe you're not. Maybe you're tired of being the strong one, and that's okay. There's courage in saying, "I'm not okay right now." There's bravery in letting the mask slip. There's dignity in breaking, not with drama, but with truth. Gentle thought. To admit your ache is not to surrender, it's to finally breathe. You don't have to explode to express pain. You don't have to fall apart loudly to deserve comfort. Your quiet unraveling is still valid. Your silent tears still count. Your internal chaos still matters. Sometimes the bravest thing is not staying strong. Sometimes it's simply saying, "I'm tired, I'm hurting, I need help," without flinching, without apologizing. We glorify survival, but we forget to honor the softness it takes to feel deeply without breaking others in the process. That's strength too. To collapse without destroying everything around you, to cry without begging anyone to stay, to let go with grace. Whispered verse. Some don't fall to be rescued, they fall to rest. You don't have to be loud to be brave. You don't have to be perfect to be enough. And you don't have to hide your breaking to still be beautiful. Falling apart gracefully means you're still choosing love even when you're in pain. It means you're still kind when you could be bitter, still gentle when you could be cruel, still present when everything inside you wants to vanish. You carried your pain with elegance. You've broken without noise. You bled without blame. And that's a kind of power they never write stories about. But they should. Closing reflection. What if your most broken moment was also your most graceful act of strength? Chapter 12. The quotes we whisper to ourselves at 2 a.m. When the world goes quiet, the truth gets louder. It's always 2 a.m. when the silence starts to speak. When the room darkens, but your thoughts don't. When everyone else is asleep, but your heart is wide awake. This is the hour when the masks come off. When you're not someone's friend or sibling or savior, you're just a soul sitting in the dark with questions too big and answers too silent. The world doesn't hear what you whisper to yourself at 2 a.m., but those words, they echo inside you for years. You don't shout them. You whisper them to no one but the walls. Why wasn't I enough? Will I ever stop hurting? Do they miss me? Do I even matter? These are not questions. They are soft wounds that beg to be named. Poetic line. The heart speaks in questions when it's too tired to pretend. Quotes become lullabies for the brokenhearted. They aren't read at 2 a.m. They are felt. Like someone somewhere once hurt the same way you do. And they left behind a line of words to prove it. Not all the quotes you love are about hope. Some are sad, lost, tired, and maybe that's why they found you, because you were tired too. There's one quote you repeat like a prayer. Maybe one day I'll be okay. Not today, not tomorrow, but maybe someday. That small line keeps you breathing when nothing else does. You whisper it not to believe it, but to survive the night. Some nights you repeat the names of people who left, not out loud, just in your mind, as if their names still carry warmth. Late night reflection. There's something sacred about remembering someone who forgot you. You don't need noise at 2 a.m. You need space, stillness, something that lets your pain float to the surface without judgment. This is when the quotes come back, not the pretty ones, the raw ones, the lines that don't pretend that everything will be okay. Lines like, I'm learning how to sit with sadness without rushing it out the door. Healing is not a straight road, it's a dark tunnel with tiny sparks. You're allowed to miss them and still move on. These aren't affirmations, they're companions. Words that sit with you in the silence without fixing anything, just keeping you company. At 2 a.m., you don't want solutions. You want understanding, not advice. Just someone who says, yeah, I know what that feels like. And if no one says it, the quotes do. You collect these quotes like broken stars, little pieces of light from other people's darkness. Each one reminds you that pain has a language, and somehow you're not the only one who speaks it. Poetic line. We read their words, but what we really want is to be read. You don't cry loud at 2 a.m. You leak. A tear, a sigh, a memory. No drama, just release. The kind of sadness that doesn't want to be seen, only survived. You might text someone, then delete it. You might write a message you'll never send, or reread one you should have forgotten. All of it is part of the ritual, the quiet ache you carry alone. Sometimes the quote isn't a sentence, it's a feeling. The way your pillow feels colder on one side, the way your chest tightens when a song plays, the way you exhale as if you're hoping the pain leaves with the breath. This isn't loneliness. This is solitude soaked in honesty. It's where you meet the most fragile parts of yourself and say, I still see you. I still care. Midnight verse. The moon sees you weep and does not turn away. At 2 a.m., you realize you don't miss the person. You miss who you were when they made you feel loved. You don't miss the past. You miss the version of you who still had hope. The quotes that comfort you aren't always positive. Sometimes they're just truthful. And truth, in the middle of the night, is the warmest thing you can find. You won't find these quotes on posters or self-help books. You'll find them in captions, comments, forgotten poems, You find them in broken sentences that somehow match your broken heart. Soft thought. Not all words are meant to inspire. Some are just meant to keep you company until the morning. So tonight, if you find yourself wide awake, thinking about the what-ifs, scrolling through old memories trying not to cry too loud, just know this. You're not weird. You're not weak. You're just human. And this is the hour where humans remember they have hearts. Because pain has a time zone. And it's always 2 a.m. What are the words that only come to you when the world goes quiet? And what do they say about the part of you that's still healing? Chapter 13. When pain becomes a second language, some wounds don't speak. They write. Word count, approximately 1,200 words. There comes a time in life when you no longer need to explain your sadness because it explains you. You begin to speak in silences and sighs, in long pauses that say more than words ever could. Not because you've given up, but because pain has become your second language. You don't cry the way you used to. You don't scream. You don't ask, "Why me?" Now you just nod slowly, close your eyes, and breathe through what you can't change. That's fluency. That's the kind of pain that doesn't live on the surface anymore. It's buried deep, like old roots, woven into the language of your soul. Poetic line. I stopped translating my pain for the world and started understanding it myself. Once upon a time, you thought heartbreak would make you bitter, but instead, it made you poetic. Now, the things that broke you are the same things that make your words hauntingly beautiful. You don't just talk about pain, you narrate it with elegance. Because when you live in sorrow long enough, you start painting with it. Pain becomes a second language when your silence feels heavier than your speech. When you smile just enough to hide the cracks. When you answer, "I'm fine," even though you haven't been fine in months. But here's the strange truth. You're not faking it. You're surviving it. You're learning to coexist with the ache. You've made room in your life for a sadness that doesn't go away. It just grows quiet. Emotional, first. Pain doesn't leave. It just learns to wear quieter shoes when it walks through your heart. Have you ever listened to someone say, "I don't want to talk about it," and somehow you already knew what it meant? That's what happens when pain becomes your second language. You recognize it in others, in their half smiles, in their nervous laughter, in their eyes that avoid saying too much. Because you've been there. You speak that dialect of people who've loved too deeply and lost too silently. You don't fear brokenness anymore. You respect it. Because now you understand what it takes to keep waking up with the shattered heart and still find ways to show up for others. That's strength in its most quiet form. Late night whisper. Some of us don't want to be healed. We just want to be understood. You start to find comfort in quotes that no longer offer hope, but companionship. Lines like, "Some feelings are too raw to name." We don't always want to be fixed, just felt. There's beauty in surviving softly. They don't make you feel better, but they remind you you're not the only one who feels like this. You begin to write differently too. Your captions, your journal entries, your private notes, they bleed with a kind of softness that only sorrow can teach. Your sadness is no longer loud. It's literary. Soft reflection. Maybe the wound didn't close. Maybe it just learned how to speak beautifully. You stop using words like devastated and start saying, "I've seen quieter days." You stop saying, "I'm broken," and start saying, I'm learning to breathe through it. You don't dramatize pain, you describe it. And that difference is emotional maturity. People think you moved on because you don't cry in public, because you don't talk about it every day. But the truth is, you carry it, always. You just don't drop it where others can see. You've become fluent in internal dialogue, in private ache, in silent survival. Poetic line. I don't tell people how I feel. I leave breadcrumbs in my silence and hope they understand. You become a writer without trying, because pain writes through you. It shapes your metaphors, it softens your tone, it teaches you that not everything broken has to be fixed. Some things are just meant to be felt, and you feel deeply, too deeply, maybe. But that's where your softness lives. That's where your poetry is born. In the quiet after they left, in the stillness of unanswered prayers, in the breath after goodbye. You no longer rush healing, you walk with it. You don't try to outrun grief, you keep pace with it. Because you know now, grief isn't a storm, it's a season, and some seasons change you forever. Melancholy. Verse, they told me healing would make me whole, but it only made me more aware of the cracks. You begin to see beauty in broken things, not because they're fixed, but because they're still here, still breathing, still hoping, still walking with scars instead of shame. You stop waiting for someone to come and understand your silence. You become your own translator. You read your pain like an old diary, with compassion, not judgment. And one day, without realizing it, you say something so raw, so soft, so honest. And someone says, that's exactly how I feel. That's the moment you know. P. Chapter 14. You don't heal. You just learn to speak beautifully about it. Maybe we never really move on. We just learn how to narrate what still haunts us. There's a strange moment in your life when people start saying, you look like you've healed, and you don't know whether to thank them or tell them how wrong they are. Because healing doesn't always feel like light. Sometimes it feels like learning how to bleed in a way that doesn't stain everything around you. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean you're over it. It means you've learned how to carry it with grace. How to say things like, I've made peace with it, when deep down you still ache every time you remember how it all fell apart. Poetic line. I didn't heal. I just taught my pain how to walk beside me. We live in a world obsessed with inspiration, with happy endings, with getting better. But what if healing isn't about becoming unbroken, just less haunted? What if you never stop missing them? What if the wound never really closes? You just stop picking at it in public? What if the real healing is learning how to tell your story without shaking? At first, you whisper the pain, timidly, carefully, like you're afraid someone will judge you for still holding on to it. But then, something shifts. You begin to share it, not as a cry for help, but as a form of art. Your pain becomes language, your scars become metaphors, your heartbreak becomes rhythm. Honest reflection. I'm not over it. I've just found more poetic ways to say, it still hurts. And isn't that what we do? We write quotes, we post captions, we tell stories, because we don't know how else to carry what we never got closure for. We dress our ache in elegant words because that's the only way the world will listen. You begin to see that healing is not a finish line. It's a process, a loop, a wave that comes back every few weeks to test if you're still standing, and sometimes you are. Sometimes you're not. But either way, you've become a storyteller. Soft verse, some of us never truly let go. We just learn to say, this is where it hurt the most, but I can talk about it now. You no longer hide your sadness. You curate it. You fold it into poems, into monologues, into carefully chosen words that sound like healing, but are really just survival rephrased. You've learned how to sound okay without being okay. And that's not dishonesty, that's resilience. Because some pain doesn't disappear. It just becomes familiar. You start calling it by name. You write letters to it. You find ways to live beside it without letting it consume you. Late night realization. Healing isn't about forgetting the story. It's about learning how to read it without crying every time. You still think about them, about the version of you that existed before they left, about the conversations that ended mid-sentence, about the apologies you never received. But now, you turn those memories into poetry, not because they stopped hurting, but because you found a way to make them beautiful. That's what healing really is, not silence, but storytelling, not erasing the pain, but rewriting it in a way that helps others feel less alone. You begin to understand that people don't need perfect answers. They need honest echoes. They need to hear someone say, I've been there too. I still feel it sometimes. I'm not over it either, but I'm learning to live around it. Haunting truth? I don't tell people I'm healed. I tell them I've found words soft enough to carry what still bruises my heart. And maybe that's why quotes feel so powerful. Because they're not solutions. They're reflections, tiny mirrors we hold up to our sadness, so we know we're not the only ones still carrying something that didn't end well. You see healing now as an art form, not a finish line. Some days you'll write like the pain just happened. Other days you'll sound like a philosopher who has figured it all out. Both are true, both are valid, because healing is a contradiction that lives inside you. Emotional line, I no longer rush to be okay. I've accepted that some parts of me were meant to be tender, forever. You've stopped explaining yourself to people who ask why it still hurts. You just smile and say, some stories stay with us. And I've decided to honor mine, not bury it. And maybe, just maybe, this is the most beautiful part of your pain. It gave you a voice, a softness, a soul that understands what it means to feel too much. Closing thought, I used to think I had to move on. Now I know I just had to move forward with everything I carry. Have you ever wondered if the words you write when you're hurting are not just reflections of your pain, but the beginnings of someone else's healing? What if your story, softly told, is exactly what? Chapter 15, the final line. Maybe the quotes were just our souls trying to be heard. And in the end, the words we kept repeating were just the echoes of a heart asking not to be forgotten. There comes a moment, after all the pain, the poetry, the silence, when you sit with the words that once saved you and realize they were never just quotes. They were confessions, whispers from a soul too tired to scream, echoes of moments you couldn't explain. So you borrowed someone else's. We never meant to become collectors of broken sentences, but somehow we found home in them. A stranger's quote, a line on a forgotten page, an Instagram caption we bookmarked in silence. It felt like they knew us, like someone, somewhere, had bled the exact same way. and survived just long enough to write it down. Maybe the quote wasn't wise, just written by someone who didn't know where else to place their sadness. And maybe that's all we ever needed. Not answers, not solutions, just proof that someone else had felt this too, that we weren't alone in our confusion, in our quiet breakdowns, in the ache we hid behind polite smiles. Sometimes it wasn't about reading something beautiful, it was about feeling less invisible. Every quote we held close was a flashlight in our darkest night, a voice saying, "I see you. I get it. Me too." I didn't fall in love with the words. I fell in love with how they understood me when no one else did. So maybe the reason we kept quoting sadness, kept writing heartbreak into captions, kept resharing those painful little lines, wasn't because we liked being sad. It was because we were begging to be seen, because our voices trembled when we tried to tell our truth directly. So we let the quotes speak for us. We weren't quoting others. We were translating ourselves, hoping someone would read between the lines, hoping someone would finally ask, "Are you okay?" But most never did. They liked the aesthetic, not the agony. People read your quotes, but they never realized you were trying to bleed quietly through them. You scroll through your old posts now, quotes about strength, about moving on, about letting go, and you realize those weren't lessons. They were wishes. You weren't writing them because you believed them. You were writing them because you were trying to. But here's the quiet miracle. Even when they didn't heal you, they helped someone else. Someone stumbled on your words at 2 a.m. and felt less alone. You became a lighthouse without knowing it. Sometimes the words we borrow become the light we pass on. We all want to be remembered, not for what we said, but for what we felt. We want someone to look at our sadness and say, "I saw it, I heard it, I understood." And so we wrap our truth in quotes, hoping it finds its way to someone who truly listens. What if that's all a quote really is? A love letter from one broken soul to another, a fragile hope that our pain can be meaningful, even if we never found the happy ending ourselves. Behind every quote you saved was a version of you trying not to disappear. And now, as you reach the end of this journey, you start to understand the quotes weren't lies. They were translations of sorrow, of strength, of survival. And maybe, just maybe, they were your soul's way of whispering, "I'm still here." You begin to see beauty in all those bookmarked sentences, each one a breadcrumb, leading you back to the parts of yourself you tried so hard to silence. We don't write quotes to be wise. We write them to stay alive. So if someone ever asks you, "Why do you always post such emotional things?" tell them this: because it's how I breathe, because it's how I speak when my voice feels too tired, because somewhere, someone else might be scrolling through their own darkness. And maybe my words can help them see the light again. Quotes weren't meant to fix us. They were meant to remind us that we weren't broken alone. And in that soft, painful truth, you'll find peace. Not because everything made sense, but because you were brave enough to speak your heart in a world that too often stays silent. What if your favorite quote was never just about the words, but about who you became each time you read it? What if every quote you loved was simply your soul trying to be heard before you had the strength to say it out loud? If your heart has been quietly carrying pain, this story might have finally spoken the words you never said out loud. Watch till the end, not to be inspired, but to feel less alone.